Welcome back to this episode of Japan's top business interviews. My name is Greg Story. I'm the president of Dale Carnegie Training Japan and your host for the program. My special guest today is Mike Alfant, who's the CEO of Fusion Systems. Mike, welcome to the show.
Thank you, Greg. Thank you for having me.
Yeah, so how did you wind up in Japan and how did you come to be running this major organization in Japan? You've got how many people working in the company now?
We have about 140 employees.
So how do you turn up in Japan and get 140 employees? Give us some of the background on that, please.
Sure. Give it my best shot. So I'm from Brooklyn, New York. I was born and raised there. My undergraduate degree is in computer science, and I worked on Wall Street for about 10 years after graduation. The investment bank I was working for back in the 1980s, I'm dating myself here, sent me to Japan on a business trip. 1980s were a good time in Japan. It was the bubble era. Things were going very well. Bank was making a lot of money. I was able to add some value in the Japan operation on that initial trip.
So you working in the technical side of banking or on the trading
I was a complete otaku nerd technologist and was very, very focused on technology. And so the bank felt that there was a shortage of that in our practice in Japan back then. And they sent me out originally just for a one-week trip to augment that. The initial trip ended up getting extended a week, so I stayed 2 weeks. And then over a period of about 18 months, made about 35, 38 trips back here at the behest of the Japanese team in the bank who felt there was some value in my presence.
Are you able to tell us the name of the bank?
Sure, it was Security Pacific.
Security Pacific.
Which was eventually acquired by Bank of America. At the time I left, which would have been about 1990, they were the fourth largest bank in America. And that sort of overlapped with me moving to Japan on a full-time basis. So I had asked the bank if it would be possible to transfer me to Japan. By that time, I had developed a strong affinity for Japan. I really liked it, and I decided I wanted to give it a shot at making a career in Japan. Fortunately for me, the bank right at that time posted a job opening for a chief technology officer in the Japan office and listed a set of criteria, all of which I met. And so I went into the HR group and submitted my application. And they told me, sure, come back in a week and we'll let you know. And I came back in a week and I said, do I have the job? And they said, absolutely not. You're staying in New York. And so I...
Did they explain why?
They wanted a Japanese person. And so, fair enough. That's, in retrospect, reasonable. But I was young and full of gumption and not very sensitive to personal risk. So I just decided to pack up my one bag. In those days, we all wore suits and ties every day. So I had my 2 suits and my 2 ties in my garment bag and moved to Tokyo and give it a go. I spent about 18 months hustling and laying groundwork in meeting people before starting my first company here called Fusion Systems. It's not the same Fusion Systems, not the same legal entity we're sitting in the office of today. But I started that company. We developed some software that facilitated trading on the Tokyo Stock Exchange. Was able to get a few good clients, mainly, again, investment banks and capital markets organizations. I ran that company for 7 years, grew it to a reasonable size, and I sold it in 1999. So I started the company June 5th, 1992. I sold it March 26th, 1999. We had never accepted outside capital into the firm, so myself, the management team, and the employees owned 100% of the company and consequently did very well in that exit. As for myself, I accepted a 5-year non-compete agreement in the fintech space, financial technology space, which in retrospect wasn't that clever, but it had a silver lining because it did force me to learn other disciplines. And so I stayed with the acquiring company for a year, still encumbered by a non-compete agreement after that. And so I started and have started over the last 20 years, another 25 companies or so, mainly in Japan, but also mainland China, Hong Kong, Australia, a couple in the US. And the vast majority of those were software and or high-tech or information technology companies. And so now I've been here for 30 years. I have no intention of ever leaving. This is my home. I love it here. And I feel a strong affinity for Japan, Japanese culture, Japanese people, and the business community and social community I operate in.
So did you buy the company back and got the name back? Or
No,
how you
no,
got the same name here?
Kind of a testament to my lack of creativity. My non-compete expired. The company that had acquired mine was subsequently acquired. That company was acquired. Somewhere along this line of big fish eating smaller fish, one of the big fish decided they didn't want to be in Asia any longer. And so they pulled that entity out of the market. That more or less coincided with my non-compete expiring. So I said, wow, I can start another financial technology company. I wonder what I'll call it. And I thought, oh, I'll call it Fusion again. And so in the market, people tend to conflate the two companies because myself and some of the key management team are still around and we're kind of sort of in the same business. The business has obviously evolved over that period of time. But these are two completely distinct companies that share a name, and a few of the faces are similar.
So go back to when you first started. I think you said it was 92. Was that
Yeah.
So you are hustling. You're trying to get business going. You start the first company, which is, I guess, Fusion at that time, right? And you're hiring staff.
Yes.
Now, Japanese, very conservative. Their parents are conservative. Their grandparents are conservative. You're a guy from Brooklyn, so what? You're a foreigner. And you want these people to come and work for you.
Yes.
How did you convince them to take that risk? And how did you get the parents and grandparents to accept the risk?
It's interesting. It's an interesting question, Greg. And it was a dynamic I was completely unaware of when I started Fusion. The first employee I hired after I discovered nobody would come work for me, or none of the people I thought would be appropriate for a startup company. So I tried to recruit computer science master's degrees, guys out of Tokyo University or Waseda, or mid-career people out of large Japanese tech companies, NTT Data, Toshiba, whoever. None of them would come work for me.
And why wouldn't they come and work for you?
Well, I think it was a different era. There were very, very few foreigners running companies in Japan. There were very few startups in Japan. When you combine those two, there were very few foreigners running startups in Japan. I mean, frankly, I don't think I was all that persuasive in retrospect. So I didn't understand how to do business in Japan at the time, and I'm sure that came across to people I was trying to recruit. And so I put it on me, not on any externality. I just didn't understand what I was doing.
But the economy had already tanked by
It had
then
too.
Tanked,
yes.
So you can imagine, okay, we're going into a downturn in the economy, which actually has lasted 30 years.
Yes.
Well, is this a good time to jump ship from my big, comfy Japanese company to this, little startup with this crazy foreigner? Probably. Indeed. That's also a factor.
Indeed. And I remember my father saying the same thing to me. Is this really a good time for you to leave your good job on Wall Street and start your own company? The nice thing about being young and not too smart is that you tend not to look at obstacles in quite the same way that more mature, more intelligent people look at them. And so I was so single-minded at that time, it just didn't occur to me that there was any obstacle I couldn't overcome. And I just went ahead and did it.
So eventually you recruited some people.
I did. The first employee I ever hired, maybe she's watching this, I don't know, was a single Japanese mother named Minako Kimura. I still remember. She had a beautiful little 3-year-old daughter. And in those days, Japanese companies would not easily employ someone in that circumstance. And once I got one, I was able to start getting a bit more traction and also learning, frankly, about what was going on in Japan. I had some good advisors, some very senior Japanese people who had taken a liking to me for unknown reasons and were very generous with their time and advice. And so I got a little bit better at what I was doing. And I think we started to get some clients, which always helps when there's interesting work to do.
These were foreign multinational clients?
Originally, they were Gaishke, they were foreign multinational clients. Some of that was based on connections I had made in New York. Some of it was based on just shoe leather here in Tokyo. It's just knocking on doors and trying to appeal to people. But hard work is a positive attribute generally, and so I just ran around all day looking for business. That's why I talked about hustling a little bit. It was a function of the amount of time and effort put into it, and got a few deals.
And so you start to accumulate some staff, which is good, and the business has got some clients, which is good. And I'm imagining that you maybe ran a team in New York as part of the bank there. And so you're used to managing people to some extent.
Yes.
You're probably still fairly young in your management career and you come to Japan.
Yes.
What were some of the things that struck you immediately when you started managing Japanese? You started to think, oh, this is a bit different, or oh, this is a bit challenging. What sort of things came up?
I think a few things struck me hard immediately was, number one, the perceived lack of ambition amongst members of the team. So when I was running small teams in New York, there was a constant dynamic tension whereby everyone was vying for promotions, bonuses, accolades, recognition. And that didn't exist here, or at least it didn't exist at a level I could discern it. I wasn't, at the time, sophisticated enough in terms of doing business in Japan to really understand that dynamic. And so that was one that struck me.
And did you think, when you came across that, hang on, wait a minute, who have I hired here? I've got a bunch of journeymen who have got no ambition. How am I going to grow this company with these people? Or did you sort of think, well, I'll just drive it anyway?
I just thought the latter. I'll just drive it anyway. I just felt like, okay, you got to go to war with the army you got, not the army you wish you had. And so this is what I got, and this is what I chose, more importantly. So I made the decision to hire these people. We're going to make it go. Now, I was very fortunate to hire some great people early on who were foreigners like me, and they had a bit more experience in Japan, and they helped me drive things very aggressively. So some of them, I believe Ray Ribble, who had been at Itochu at the time, very close friend of mine, and he was the seventh employee I was able to bring on board. Rajiv Trahan, who was at the time at Toshiba. He and Ray started on the same day, actually. Again, great friend, long-term friend, and a host of others. I don't need to give you a litany of all the great guys and gals I hired, but I think we were able to get some traction with that initial team based more on a style almost of heroic leadership, leading from the front. Not making elaborate plans and detailed project charts, but more like, just point me in the right direction. We're young, we're ambitious, we're energetic, we will get this done.
And to some extent in Japan, that model works because Japanese like to be told where we're going in terms of a broader vision, but being told what to do, as opposed to having to take a lot of accountability. So did you find that sort of top-down at the very beginning was quite well accepted by the Japanese teams?
Yeah, we've talked about this before. There's a process orientation here as opposed to an achievement orientation. With my team in New York way back in the 80s, what I found was that what I needed to do was clearly articulate a goal and essentially get out of the way. What I found in Japan was that I really needed to flesh out the process, and the process would then enforce itself based on the characteristics of the employees and the culture here. And it was up to me to guide that process towards the goal. And so it's maybe a subtle difference in terms of leadership. And it, again, took me a while, as most things take me a while to learn. It took me a while to learn that. But I think you're right. I think your observation is correct. When we were able to create a hybrid and say, okay, I've got a nucleus of people who are very goal-oriented, achievement-oriented, mission-oriented, get-it-done kind of people, and then a group of process-oriented people that can essentially support that hard-driving mission orientation of the core group. That worked. That worked well, and we got traction. We started to move things forward. And, everyone wants to play for a winning team. And so once you create a culture, a perception that this is a winning team, recruiting and retention became much easier. And we started to get people bringing their friends into the company. We started to get referrals just through market awareness.
But that in itself is quite an achievement, I think, because whenever you look at the engagement surveys that they have, or employee satisfaction surveys they have in big companies, there's always a question there: would you recommend this company to your friends and family, basically, right? And Japanese always score that extremely low.
Yeah.
Because they're hesitant to take accountability and responsibility for something like that for people that are close to them. So getting staff, Japanese staff, to then reach out to their contacts and get them to come into the company, that's quite a big deal, I think.
I think that's right. And, that's I guess now they would call it a net promoter score or something similar. I would say, however, the thing I was doing, which is probably a little different, was I was giving opportunities to Japanese that maybe wouldn't have had opportunities otherwise. I was hiring a lot of women. Number one, I was hiring a lot of Japanese men that didn't have college degrees. And so, we had some guys who had spent their formative years as, ski bums or playing with motorcycles or whatever else. And then all of a sudden you're 27 years old and you look around and you think, I better get serious about life. And they were great. They were really good. Once given an opportunity, they really appreciated it. And they had networks of similar people that they brought to the table. And so, some of it was I've always been careful about not competing directly for talent with really tier one firms. And I don't put a lot of stock into credentials. I'm much more interested in chemistry and culture. Can someone succeed in our environment? Will they fit into our environment? I don't particularly care where they graduate.
So you're in an interview situation, you're meeting this person probably for the first time.
Yeah.
How can you ascertain culture, chemistry mix is going to be right with this person you hardly know?
Yeah, I think interviewing is it's an acquired skill. I think there are a lot of mistakes that are made in the interview process. Normally, at least in my firm, when someone is meeting me, they're pretty deep into the process. They probably had 6 or 8 interviews already. And so we're pretty sure that the person can contribute to at least one of the project teams here. And it's up to me to ascertain, will this person fit? And essentially, I do a few things. Number one is I don't interview to ascertain what people do not know. So I'm not looking to ask questions that are sort of gotcha questions. I'm really looking to ask questions which elicit a response so that we have a dialogue. It's not question answer with me doing all the questioning, the interviewee doing all the answering. It's more of a dialogue. That's number one. Number two is I'm very interested in what people do outside of work. What are their hobbies? What are their interests? What's their family situation? I think achievement orientation is a big thing. And again, this is something you and I have talked about in the past, is to me, I'm very drawn to people who say, you know what, I decided to run a marathon. and I set out, I put a training schedule together, and I trained for 18 months, and I finished a marathon. Or, I went to the dojo for 7 years for Aikido or Judo, and I got my Shodan in my black belt. And that, to me, is an achievement, and that mindset translates very well into the corporate environment. And that same achievement orientation works well when you're trying to develop technology or build a business or facilitate a client's requirements. And so I try to come at it from that angle of, does this person have that drive in them such that when they decide to do something, it's hard to do, they still get it done. That's important to me. And then I look for people that are generally people I like, people I find some positive chemistry that I have an affinity for, that I would want to hang out with after work. The problem is, the corollary to your question is, what's the difficult aspect in that? The difficult aspect is, as a manager, maintaining emotional distance from those people once you've hired them. Because you can't be their friend, you're their boss. You can be friendly towards them, but that's different than being their friend, per se. And so I think that challenge of finding people you naturally like, admire, respect, bringing them into the firm, and then maintaining emotional distance from them is a challenge that I've always had a hard time with, but it's something I think you have to do. And that's how I've recruited and retained over the years.
If you want to be successful as a leader, do the Leadership Training for Managers course. All companies need people who can both manage and lead. Leading people screams out for real skills in communication, dealing with all different types of people, being excellent at innovation, planning, delegation, handling mistakes, doing performance reviews really well, and inspiring and motivating the team. Do the Leadership Training for Managers course now in either Japanese or English. And you've scaled the business up, and so you've grown it quite a bit. And starting out requires a certain style, a certain application of things, and certain people that you need to recruit and then work with. But as you get bigger, as you get scale, you're no longer that frontline touch. You're actually working through people. So as a manager, as you started to get scale, what were some of the challenges and difficulties that came up when you're at scale to lead the business?
First of all, the biggest challenge for me is I don't like that kind of situation. I don't like sitting in an office playing with spreadsheets or reading reports, and I don't particularly feel I'm very good at it, so I don't add a lot of value. So I start to lose my focus and motivation in those situations. I think my philosophy has always been simple, is hire people that are smarter than me, be very clear about my expectations, make those expectations coincidental with their aspirations, so some give and take on there, and then get out of their way. Let them run with the ball. I'm not a micromanager at all, but it is challenging for me to transition as a company grows away from the front lines. And so what I studied and what I practiced for many years was sales, business development. Okay, I need to be this company's best salesman now, not the frontline execution guy, not the guy who's writing software, and not the guy who's architecting systems for clients, but the guy who's bringing in business. And that then becomes very quickly the top recruiter in the company. You're bringing in people, talent, capability to augment the existing team. And that's the transition. That's how it worked for me. I think I'm not a big company guy. It's just not my thing. I don't enjoy sitting in an office. I don't enjoy a schedule of back-to-back meetings. What I enjoy is speaking with clients, interacting with the engineers, engaging in the community on behalf of my firm and like-minded firms. And so that's definitely been a challenge for me over the years. It's one you have to surmount.
And you said like 25 companies, I think you mentioned.
Yeah.
So you take that problem, like that's just one company trying to oversee what's going on there. Now you've got 2, 3, 4. How do you take care of a 25 company empire?
Yeah. We've never had 25 companies at one time, thankfully, because that would be quite an empire that's well beyond my capability. At any given time, there are probably 5 or less active entities that I'm engaged with. And a lot of that includes community service work, non-paid or NPO positions as well, where you bring a different mindset to the table. But I think what I found is, as I've gained experience, as I've gotten better at this, I have more capacity to do these things. I've also found an increased willingness to get out of the way and not interject, even when I see things going maybe a little bit differently than I would do them. If you're hiring smart people and you're empowering them, you kind of owe it to them to give them an opportunity to take it where they're going to take it.
That must be hard though, because when you're the founder, when you started this thing from zero, it's your baby and you've grown it, and then, someone's zigging and zagging when you think they should be going in a straight line. How do you restrain yourself from sort of jumping and saying, hey, wait a minute, I think you're going a bit too off to the right there, let's correct that?
Yeah, 2 things there. I think it's about judgment. It's a judgment call, number 1. Number 2, it's a realization that nobody will ever take your business as seriously as you take your business. And you need to accept that. That's just the way it is. And so one of the frustrations for founders, for entrepreneurs, and I hear it quite often, is why isn't everyone taking this as seriously as I'm taking it? Well, the answer is they won't. And so, as much as I love kids, I like your son, I don't love him as much as you love him. And I never will, and I shouldn't. And I think it's the same for your own business, using the analogy of it's your baby. You just have to accept that. Is when you hand your baby over to the school or the babysitter or eventually the university or whatever else, you've got to let them go with it, with the understanding that it's still your child, but you got to give them room.
And you talked before about at the sale point of Fusion the first time that everyone got money out of that deal. That tells me that you must have instituted a profit share or ownership share arrangement fairly early on in the business. Is that the case?
I did. My philosophy is every employee should be a shareholder in the firm. And every company I work with, that's one of the principles under which the company operates. I think as a founder, it's important to share the wealth. It's important to align interests. It's important for everyone to have upside, to find upside in the endeavor. And so that's just my personal philosophy. Is I intend to do a lot of deals and start a lot of companies and engage in a lot of initiatives. And I want to leave money on the table in every one of those. I want people to always feel they got a better deal than they would have otherwise gotten. And if you do that, people want to do business with you again in the future. And I think that's important. That's an important criteria, is how much repeat business do you have? How many repeat investors do you have? How many times will people be your customer in various incarnations? And I think part of that is, I wouldn't call it generosity, but I think expansiveness in a commercial sense.
And so are we talking about a microscopic share of a company that really, it doesn't actually mean that much financially, perhaps? Or are we talking about, some reasonable sum of money, which it's your money, basically, that you're giving away? So try to give a sense of what's that proportion.
My philosophy is to always dilute myself below 50%, 50%.
Below 50%?
Below 50%. I think maintaining control via legal maneuverings is not my style of leadership. I might be the largest single shareholder, but I don't want a majority of the shares.
Why is that?
I think I want people to feel they are owners in the company. that they're not really working for me, they're working for themselves and for their mates who are sitting around them in the office. And frankly, most importantly, that they're working for the clients. And I think what I found, what aligns interests around that is having equity in the endeavor, having shares in the firm, having commercial upside that's consistent with the founder's commercial upside. And so that's always worked for me. That's always been a positive dynamic. Now, I think the mechanism by which you do that, you need to be a little bit careful. Day one, if you dilute yourself below 50%, you're not giving yourself a lot of headroom to attract good talent and be flexible down the road. And so normally I dilute myself over a period of 3 to 5 years down under 50%. And that's worked for me. It's worked very well.
What do you do about, new hire, work for the company for a couple of years, they've received their share of the company, and then they walk out the door and join a competitor?
Yeah, that's happened.
They still got ownership of the program or
They
the company?
do.
Or you have a clause there that says, hey, if you leave the company, the shares come back to the firm?
Right. So this is scar tissue you're peeling off. Thank you. Had that happen multiple times until I learned my lesson and said the company has the right to repurchase your shares should you decide to leave. Not the obligation, but the right to do that. So I'm trying to think how many times it took for me to fall out that window before I learned. Probably 3, maybe 4 times before I learned that lesson. But eventually I learned it. So I think it's fair. I think it's perfectly reasonable. The quid pro quo is we don't have a vesting schedule for those shares or those options. We just grant them. But if you leave, whatever you paid for them will pay back, and off you go. And
so they're actually
live and be well.
They're actually buying the shares. You're not granting the shares.
Depends on the situation. Usually for options we're granting. If it's shares, they're buying. And so I normally don't do the shares until someone becomes reasonably senior in the organization. Not necessarily senior in terms of level in the company, but senior in terms of longevity in the company. I think at that point they've proven it. Yeah. And very often there's a way to engineer that where they're paying out of a bonus that you've granted them that they might not have otherwise received. And that helps them on the tax side. And
Japan's not very tax friendly for options and
no, it's not.
Shares, are they?
It's not. But it's not impossible. It's not impossible. I would counsel people to get good external advice on that. I think it's easy to run afoul of your own common sense where you say, well, this is intuitively obvious, until you meet the tax man who informs you what the actual rules and regulations are.
And I guess that, we talk about getting engagement. Well, I mean, if you've got a ownership of the company, that's tremendously engaging, I imagine.
I think so.
And did you see that transition where people who are, as you say, they're not the owner, founder, it's not their baby, they're working in the company, they're diligent, they're engaged to some extent, but when they start getting options or they're getting shares, or they're buying the shares, I guess, did you see a real marked lift in accountability and engagement?
Case by case. It is not ubiquitous across the board by any stretch. Now, the thing I will say in my own defense is I think everyone wants to be Santa Claus. Everyone wants, as a founder, as an entrepreneur, you want to be as generous as you can with people you bring into the firm. You very quickly realize that that's not a feasible approach to running, especially a bootstrap entrepreneur like myself, where I'm not going out raising large sums of money, usually. I'm using my own capital to do this. And so my goal in most of these startups is to create a situation where a day comes, a single day, where I can be Santa Claus, where I sit in my office and people come in and I hand them an envelope which says, doesn't have cash in it, that wouldn't be kosher, but it's a piece of paper that says, here's what your options or shares are worth. And that makes me feel fantastic. And so my aspiration is always to engineer the situation where I get that one day at the very end where I'm Santa Claus. And
which you have been.
I have been, and it's great. It's fulfilling and it's memorable, and it makes all the hard work worth it.
But for a lot of founders, the last thing they want are partners, because they want to control the business. They don't want to have to go to board meetings and put up with a bunch of crap questions from their, silent partners or minimally involved partners. And yet here you are creating multiple partners in the business. And I presume they must all, some of them at least must be sitting on the board. So
Yes.
did you find you were creating a rod for your own back there or not?
I think it's important to align interests. And broadly speaking, entrepreneurs run companies either to create enterprise value or to facilitate a lifestyle. For me, it's always about the creation of enterprise value. And so the people, the individuals that become significant shareholders and partners with me are people who are like-minded. I think a skeptical board is healthy. I think corporate governance is critical. Entrepreneurs have a great advantage over large companies in that they're not encumbered by unwieldy governance structures. But that's a double-edged sword, because if you have no governance structure, then you're the loose cannon rolling around on the deck of the ship. We don't want that. So I think engineering an appropriate governance structure that preserves autonomy for the founder within predefined parameters, lets the board have input on strategy and direction, but not on operations, and is broadly representative of the shareholder interests, works well for me. And so I don't mind. I have very thick skin. I think it's, for me, I feel good when the board questions me in any of these endeavors. And frankly, my feeling about everything in life is if you purport to be an expert, you should be able to explain it in a compelling way to an interested 12-year-old. If you can't do that, you're not an expert. So if I can't explain it to my board, then I probably have to go back and do homework. And so I think that challenge creates an opportunity for personal growth for me. I don't mind it at all. Now, an interesting, again, corollary to this is I do sit on the board of public companies here in Japan where I'm not a founder. I'm an independent director. And the mindset there is very, very interesting, I think, and a big change from the founder CEO mindset.
What's different?
Well, what I learned from my senpai, from my teacher, Nick Benish, who's a friend of ours, who runs Board Director Training Institute here, is the mindset is nose in, hands off, especially for independent directors. And so I think to be an independent director in a public company here in Japan, you need strong alignment with the vision that's been articulated by the CEO. However, you need to be completely independent of the CEO and be willing to speak your mind. However, you also need to be willing to be emotionally flexible and not stubborn if the company chooses not to heed your advice. Now, I do think it's important to go on record and vote your conscience in board meetings and get your opinions into the minutes. But I also think it's important not to obstruct the founder's vision as an independent director. So I think it's more of a supporting role as an independent director as opposed to a founder CEO. But I learn a lot by doing it. And I think that emotional flexibility is really the key aspect there for me.
And so we think about getting innovation from teams. I don't mean technical R&D specialist scientist type of innovation, creativity.
Yes.
I mean your average, Joe in the company who's got different roles. They're playing different roles. But in terms of, are you the source of the ideas? Are you the driver of the direction, of new direction? Or is it something that is coming from bottom up that individuals feel empowered to say, hey, Mike, I've got this idea, we could do this, or we could make this change. How does that work inside the company?
Okay, a few things. Ideas are a dime a dozen. I'm not a big idea guy, and I don't subscribe to necessarily the solicitation of business ideas, either internally or externally. I think everyone's got a lot of ideas. Execution is what counts. Number two is people, even experienced people, conflate innovation and entrepreneurship. And you see it in public discourse and in public policy all the time, where people interchangeably use the terms innovation and entrepreneurship. And I think it's important to have, in my mind, there's a clear definition. Innovation is the creation of new technologies and or new business models. Entrepreneurship is the commercialization of innovation. That's an important distinction. The third thing I would say is nobody, at least I shouldn't say that, I am not smart enough, savvy enough to come up with innovative ideas that are commercially viable on a regular basis. But there's one source that is always savvy enough, and that's our customers. If you ask, in our case, our customers, what do you need? What would you pay for? I've just found customers are very willing to be completely transparent and say, here's what we're lacking, here's what we see as an exposure in the market or a gap in the market. If you guys were to have something that we could buy, we would strongly consider it. And so I think that's the real source of a lot of our business software, is going to our customers and sitting down with them and listening carefully. And so it's that other thing we've talked about in the past, the 80-20 rule. If you're sitting with a customer, you better be listening 80% of the time, talking 20% of the time. And if you do that, and if you listen actively, then I think, based on experience, based on judgment, based on your professional expertise, you can filter ideas that are coming from the market and decide what would be appropriate for the capability your firm has and try to turn those into commercially viable products or services.
How about trust, getting trust in Japan? I mean, you started from nothing.
Yes.
And then that's one level of trust to get people to join the company. It's another level of trust to retain the people you want to retain. There are other levels of trust when you get to scale, where your daily interaction with people is obviously going to be diluted simply because the largest number of people there. So how did you find you're able to build trust as from the start and as the company scaled?
Yeah, this is, it's interesting you bring this up, Greg. I have this talk with my daughter all the time. She's 24 years old now, by the way, living in the US. And what I tell her is you need to behave the same way whether anyone is watching you or not. And what I mean by that is you need to understand your own values. What are your personal values? What's important to you? And you need to exemplify those values 24/7. In Japan, talk is cheap. Nobody really pays attention to what people say. They pay attention to what people do. And
is that because they're skeptical? Is that because they're sort of, seen this before, been in this rodeo before? Or why is that they don't actually take the words at face value?
That's interesting. I mean, I don't know. I wouldn't purport to know enough about Japanese culture to opine on that, other than to say I do think it's a cultural aspect in Japan where actions are what counts.
Is that sort of tatemae,
tatemae aspect?
The superficial reality, the actual reality? Do you think that's a...
Yeah, I think there's something to that. I think there's some, I mean, if you think about it, it's kind of exemplified by the whole contrast between running for prime minister in Japan versus running for president in the US, where you've got essentially an 18-month or 2-year campaign in the US, which is all about talking. And in Japan, it's a week. You get 7 days, and basically people judge you based on your actions. And so I just think it's a cultural, long-standing cultural aspect here. I like it. It's much better, fits my character much better than the talk
So you're not
aspect.
You're not standing up in front of the masses there, giving some massive oratory and getting people to storm the barricades with your leadership. It's something a little bit different.
I think if you look at it, going back to the leadership style, there's the heroic leadership style that was prevalent in the past, whereby the general or whoever it was the standard bearer, literally carrying the flag, and so that everyone could see where he or she was on the battlefield and being physically present, visible, and towards the front lines. That's more what I find positive, and I have an affinity for that. Much more so than the technocratic leadership style where you're back in the Pentagon or back in some bunker somewhere pushing buttons and moving pieces around a chessboard and inspiring action that way. I think the tradition in Japan is much more the former than the latter. And so there's some resonance around that. But, I think leadership's intensely personal. And just to go back to the original question, I think understanding yourself, understanding your personal values, and living and breathing those personal values, exemplifying them, even when it's not in your short-term best interest to do so, especially when it's against your short-term commercial interest to do so, is important. And I think it's also important to take responsibility for every decision you make, the good ones and the bad ones. And I think people, I don't have the capability to lead the masses. I think I have a capability to lead people who have similar values to mine. And that's who I'm looking to attract. And so I'm not really looking to broadcast my leadership message far and wide. I'm looking to narrowcast it and have it fall into the ears and eyes of people who already are predisposed to have similar values to mine. And if I can do that, then I think I can have an effective leadership style.
Are you doing business with Japan? Do you really know how things work? Japan Business Mastery provides the answers. Do you have the right networks and know how to create them? Do you know how to get on the same wavelength with Japanese buyers? Do you know what being trustworthy looks like from the Japanese perspective? Japan Business Mastery is based on more than 30 years' experience in Japan and will become your go-to guide. Want to succeed in Japan? Buy Japan Business Mastery now. I think Japan has, like every country, a massive population of boss watchers. And people study every little facet of the boss. Is the boss in a good mood today? Can I go to the boss with this particular thing I want to talk about? Today looks like a bad day. I'll pick another day. So they're watching very carefully our nuances, any changes in us, voice, face, actions. We're short-tempered today. How are we looking? Are we looking very Buddhist today? What's going on? And so they're picking their moment. They're studying us very carefully. So they've got that aspect. The other aspect is how do we know that we actually have earned their trust? How do we actually know they trust us? Because the Japanese are also very ninja around telling you what they really think. They're very skilled at not actually revealing themselves. They're able to hide quite well, and they've got this boss watching going in one moment, they've got this ninja hiding thing at the other moment. How do you actually ascertain that, yes, I have achieved trust?
Okay, I think a couple of things there. I think that's an astute observation in that people are much more perceptive generally than we give them credit for. And so we might think we have a poker face or are being neutral or fair or open and transparent. But if our energy, if our demeanor, if our aura does not project that honestly and sincerely, people pick up on it very readily. And so I think this is going back to what I said before about exemplifying your values, consistency. So again, behave the same way whether anyone's watching you or not. And in most cases, somebody is watching you, whether you know it or not. But I think that consistency of behavior, of demeanor, of energy does inspire a degree of trust in that there's predictability. Stableness in Japan is highly valued. So I think that's one thing. I think number two is really being genuinely interested in liking the people around you. And so, again, people pick up on that. I think the third thing is being a good listener, not being defensive when employees or partners or affiliates come to you. They're coming to you after having thought very carefully about what it is they want to say and how they want to say it. And so you have an obligation to let them do that, not to interrupt them, not to say yes, but, not to be defensive, but to absorb what they're saying. And frankly, from a shareholder value perspective, if we've hired intelligent, ambitious, aggressive people, which we purport to do, then we would be doing ourselves a disservice by not giving them a hearing. Now, that doesn't mean you do everything that somebody suggests. In fact, you rarely do things that people suggest. They might be missing part of the big picture. They might be maybe a little bit less experienced than the CEO, et cetera. But I personally take it as a challenge to learn one new thing from every human interaction I have. And so if I go into a meeting with an employee or a partner or an associate with that mindset, I will learn one new thing from this encounter.
Where did that idea come from? Because that's not so common. I mean, most people going into those meetings trying to direct the meeting, dominate the meeting, have control of those people, rather than absorbing wisdom from them, actually imparting wisdom to them, is the usual leader model. So when did that sort of idea come up that actually we're going to reverse this?
Yeah, probably after several thousand hours of meditation and soul searching and deep thinking about what works for me.
Are you a meditator? Is
I
this
do.
Something you do?
I meditate every day. I find it useful. I find it productive for me. And so I'm relatively disciplined about time management and how I choose to spend my time. And it is effective for me to spend 10 to 15 minutes, maybe 20 minutes a day.
And I think you have some, I'm going to call it walking meditation too.
I do, as you know.
I know that you like to walk
as you
rather
know,
than catch public transport or taxis.
Yeah. So I budget 100 kilometers a week walking for myself, which sounds like a lot, but it's not really that impressive. And Tokyo is a fantastic walking city, frankly. It's relatively flat. It's got a lot of interesting neighborhoods. It's completely safe. As I get older, I find that having convenience stores with clean bathrooms every kilometer or so is a useful dynamic in my long walks. And so I do a lot of walking meditation. That sometimes creates funny situations. Last month, I found myself, I had walked over the Rainbow Bridge, which is one of my favorite walks to take into Odaiba. And I was pretty deep into some mindfulness exercise. And I looked up and I found myself in a restricted area at the port with a bunch of big cranes lifting things off of boats and a bunch of people wearing hard hats and uniforms looking at me thinking, this guy's not supposed to be here. But nobody's saying anything to me. And so I had to sort of figure out, how do I get out of this situation? Luckily in Japan, a few apologies, gomen-nasai, hontoni gomen-nasai, and turning around and walking out got me out of it. But yeah, I do a lot of walking and meditating while I'm walking.
And so you're in these meetings trying to learn something from people. That's I think, very unique. We've had a broad discussion around leadership, and the scaling of your business and how you start, etc. Are there any things that I should have asked you, or any things we haven't discussed which you think are relevant to the topic of leading in Japan?
Yes. I think it's not so much things you haven't asked, it's things I haven't had the foresight to mention. I think one trap we all fall into is trying to be Japanese. As foreigners, we cannot and we should not try to be Japanese. I think we should be very cognizant of Japanese culture, Japanese manners, Japanese business practices. We should be very solicitous of those practices and culture, but we should not try to be Japanese. Our unique value in this market is that we are foreigners, and we bring something to the table that is otherwise difficult to find in this market. So that's one thing I'm always reminding myself of, is you've got to be true to your own self, your own culture, your own upbringing, while understanding that we exist here as guests of our very gracious hosts and should keep that foremost in our minds at all times. So I think that's number one. I think number two is you're playing a long game in Japan. This is a marathon, not a sprint. I've run companies in New York, in Tokyo, in Shanghai. China and the U.S. are very similar. Shanghai and New York are very similar. Those, in my mind, are boxing matches. The bell rings, and if you're not at 100% alertness and energy in the first 30 seconds, you're going to be staring up at the ceiling very, very quickly because someone will have punched you in the nose, and knock you to the ground. In Japan, it's a situation where you do not look at the finish line. You keep putting one foot in front of the other. You just keep moving in the direction that you've previously decided is roughly where you want to get to. And you do it on a consistent basis, thinking long term, not worrying about, am I getting close to the finish line in this marathon? Because as we know, when you run that marathon, if you start thinking around mile 15, is this thing over? Am I getting close? You might as well pack it in. You're not going to get to the end of that one. And so I think having that long-term mindset as opposed to that boxing match mindset is important for managers in Japan. I think number 3 is really taking care of yourself. You cannot be a good manager. You cannot be an asset to your firm, to your friends, to your partners without being healthy. And so sleeping well, eating well, exercising are critical to being able to maintain the pace and stamina you need to be effective here. And then the last thing I'll say, which I just touched on, is friends, is having networks of people that you can go to for advice, to bounce ideas off of, to interact socially in a non-competitive, open manner.
Well, I've certainly benefited from doing that with you and getting
likewise.
advice from you, right? So,
thank you, and
I
likewise.
appreciate that.
And so I think those 4 things I would want to get out on the table, maybe for our next discussion. We can go into more detail on those, but we didn't touch on any of those today.
And you talk about long term. Of course, I understand all of that. But if you're on a 3 to 5 year posting in Japan, and these days with the tax situation, unless you want your global assets tax, everyone leaves before the 5 year mark.
Yes.
Unlike us, we're
committed.
Done. We're done.
Yes.
But so they've only really got a relatively short window. I mean, 5 years is long, but it's not that long in the sort of in the Japan marathon. So if we're going to give 3 pieces of advice in addition to what you've already talked about to someone who is new to Japan, say they've been told, okay, you're going to Japan and you're going to run the business there, or they've just arrived, what would be 3 pieces of advice you could give them?
Okay. I would say number 1 is limit the scope of your vision and goals. Pick 1 or 2 things that are really important to the business, to the shareholders, to the employees, to the clients, and focus on those. Don't spread yourself too thin. It's hard to get things done dropping into this market. And if you try to do too much, you'll end up leaving here with 25 work streams that are between 50 and 75% done, which is the same as 0% done, and really not leaving a legacy that's beneficial here. But if you focus, depending on your capabilities and the scope of your vision, on 1, 2, 3 things, you have a fair shot at getting a few of those 100% done. So I'd say that's number 1. Number 2 is really have thick skin. This is a 4,000-year-old culture. It is not going to change for you. It will not. And feeling aggrieved, feeling frustrated is not conducive to generating value. It just isn't. And so I think what I call having a thick skin is don't let small things bother you. This is a very unique culture. Japan is an outlier on the global scale of first world economies. It is the most different place on the planet in my experience and in my travels, and appreciate it for what it is. Don't think it will change for you. And I think the third thing is really avail yourself of Japan. I think a lot of people come here on 5-year postings, and when they're winding it down and I ask them, what do you wish you had done more of? It's, I wish I had seen more of Japan. I basically haven't gotten outside the Yamanote-sen in Tokyo, other than maybe a ski trip or an onsen trip, which was effectively stage managed for you as the boss. It was organized carefully and maybe guided and very carefully orchestrated. I would encourage people, depending on what you enjoy doing, get out and hike, go to the Japanese mountains, get on your bike and ride outside of town, take some weekend trips and just really explore Japan. Japan's a wonderful place, and it's a unique place, and it's a place where you can really learn, and it's very safe and very welcoming for foreigners. And so I would encourage those people in those 3 to 5 year assignments, don't limit yourself to the central business district here in Tokyo. Just get outside and explore, be part of the long history of Japan, and get to meet some people, because, in a lot of ways, the real Japan is not Tokyo. The real Japan is outside. And the same as it is in America. We can be in New York or Los Angeles, Washington, Chicago. Those are great cities, and there's a lot of action, but the real America is in the middle. That's where traditional American values are embodied, and that's what I find interesting, and I feel the same way about Japan. So I would advise those folks, get out and see it, experience it, do some things where maybe you even put yourself in a bit of a difficult situation where it's not all organized for you, and you got to improvise and adapt a little bit out there in the countryside. It's a lot of fun.
It is a lot of fun, and it's been a lot of fun having this talk with you, Mike.
Same. Thank you, Greg.
So thank you very much to Mike Alfant, the CEO of Fusion, for sharing his experiences as a founder in Japan and a very successful businessman. We didn't talk about it, but Mike has been the president of everything here, from what I can see. He's been the president of the American Chamber of Commerce. He's the current president of the Tokyo American Club, and I'm sure he's probably been president of a whole raft of other things I haven't even heard about, but he's an extremely well-known personality in Tokyo. He's a very generous person as well. I can vouch for that from my own experiences with him, and I'd like to thank him again for joining me today. Thank you.
Thank you, Greg.
And please join us again for our next episode of Japan's Top Business Interviews.